Okay, today I'm going to speak little about predator and parasitic financial sector. Now, before I do that, I'm going to briefly mention about a book written in 2016 by Victor Peter A. Victor, Steady State Economy, right? This is about. I read this book long time ago, and I think the book speaks about five scenarios. This is about the Canadian economy, and one of the things he focused on is to have a steady state economy in Canada, with certain taxation regime, so that the income gap is reduced. So one of the problems presently you see in the world is that income inequality, which creates a lot of social unrest, right? So that's something I read this book about 10 years ago, and the book is available. The PDF copy is available under Research Crate, so most people can access the book. And he talks about this failure of neoliberalism. Now I'm going to focus on certain things on the financial sector in Europe. Okay, some of this work is I am referring to Yanis Varoufakis. Okay, now the Europeans confiscated the American, confiscated the Russian dollars, Russian reserves in European bank. Now Russia is just going very methodically, and they are trying to take some financial institutions which has invested in Russian energy sector. So they are trying to hit back at this confiscation of the wealth. And if you take the financial sector, I label them as predator or parasitic. That is also based on this steady state economics. Okay, and that is at the top level. So these financial sectors are very vulnerable. It depends on trust and things like that. And if you look at the financial sector, you have a lot of derivatives in finances. Not we have derivatives in calculus dy by dx, and the second derivative and the third derivative. Something like that. On economics also, you get many derivatives. You can have resources, or you can have wealth, and on that you can create economics, and then you can create economics on that again. So you can have second derivative, third derivative on finances. So, and again then we have this Saudi Arabia moving away from the exclusiveness of petrodollar. Now they say yuan can be paid. For dollars you can use yuan. So my understanding is that the European banking sector and financial sector is under stress, because the Russians have started to take retaliatory action. Okay, so my feeling is that the Americans and the European financial sector is in really bad shape. Okay, only reason why they work this way is, my understanding is, because the reserve currency status of dollar, and the euro currency was tied to that dollar, so that you had the America as the hegemony or hegemonster, and the Europeans were like the vassal states of that. So if the European financial sector is being stressed, and Mr. Putin is doing in a very methodical way, and some of the people in the Western countries call Mr. Putin the only adult in the room. So I think the financial sector is going through some kind of decay in Europe and also in America. Okay? Europe, because of the Russians are trying to give a retaliatory attack because the Europeans countries. Now Belgium was against this confiscation of this Russian reserves in Western countries. So because of the SIP banking system, the Americans cannot dominate. So if the American dollar cannot dominate, you can't have sanctions. You can't do anything like that. It's very difficult to do it. You have to spend a lot of energy on that. So even in America, according to Yanis, even American banks had a lot of dollars as reserve. They are moving away. So I always considered, in my way of economics, my way of thinking on this steady state economics, I always thought that the financial sector is very vulnerable because that is at the top, right? If you take, they are the in biological terms. So steady state economics is a biological way of looking at it. I mean, the biological pyramid. So it worked because of the Americans. Americans could force things to do that. That is why we were all trapped in the American financial system. And the European financial system was coupled to the American system. Okay? Because Europe didn't have army. So they used America to enforce it. Now you have this Cantillon effect. Okay? That is, when you have this reserve currency and when you have fiat currency, you can print money and you can direct your money towards the industry you want. So what the Americans are doing is they are trying to direct their money towards artificial intelligence and the war industry. But if you take Europe doesn't build any, they don't have a military defense complex, very mature or so-called developed military defense complex. So they depended on America. They have spent lot on social programs, and the weapons and everything were created by Americans, and Americans spend a lot of money on that. And Donald Trump says to Europe, okay, if you want to have defense, then you have to pay for it. So Europe cannot fight Russia now because they don't have money. Their economics have been bankrupt because of this value of energy. That is again coming back to my kind of economics, my kind of steady economics, and they don't produce weapons either. But if you take some of the European countries want to fight with Russia, especially Britain. There is you have this Peter the Great, and you have 100-year, 200-year conflict going on between the British royal family and Europe, between Britain and Russia. Russia was never conquered. Okay, I mean the European armies have invaded it, but they are not conquered. But if you take China, certain areas near the sea, right, were conquered by the British. with the opium. Opium is the thing which was behind this Chinese thing. So, if you take Boris Johnson, when he came to this Ukraine, Russian, if you can call Russian invasion of Ukraine, there was agreement because Russia is insisting mainly on its independence, okay, and there was agreement, and that agreement was their initial between Zelensky and it was done in Turkey. Then earlier there were Minsk agreements in Belarus, Minsk 1 and 2. So the European countries wanted to break up Russia. That was the main thing, especially the British. So there is some historical reason to do that. Right? Now Russia is attacking the financial system in Europe. That means Europe doesn't have money. Most of the European countries are almost bankrupt. And they all have this financial economy, which I don't advocate. I think the financial economy is very vulnerable, and so that the Russians with the Chinese are going to destroy the European financial system. They are doing in a systematically way. They are trying to confiscate some of the energy sector because the European countries invested a lot of money in the energy sector in Russia. So the European countries are in real bad shape. Americans are in bad shape, but because of the American dollar, they can run the country for some time. But even that, so what I said about financial sector and this AI is also to me mostly predator level. In real terms, it should be actually parasitic, but if you take the pyramid in steady state economics, they are predator level. So I think the Russians are going to attack the financial sector in Europe. You don't need to have weapons, and you need to have Chinese to do that because Chinese have built the alternate finance sector, and then we have this BRICS bank, which is challenging the IMF and the World Bank. For like Sri Lanka, we can pay all our loans. We can go to the BRICS or we can go to China, and we can get a loan from them and pay most of the loans, and we pay a loan to China. May say, example, we have $5 billion. We take a loan from China and we pay those loans, and we pay Chinese about $7 billion for a more extended, for say that we had to pay loan for 20 years. So we say to the Chinese, we don't want to be in this IMF World Bank system. Because this IMF World Bank system, using the dollar, they are supporting economics of genocide. Okay, that's my way of looking at it. So we can take a loan, say $4 billion from China, and we pay $6 billion to China over an extended period of time. Right? Say if we had to pay the loan for 20 years, then we pay for 30 years and we pay extra money. So there are ways of doing these things. And the Chinese are attacking the Western system now. They will not live under the Western system anymore. There is no more 100 years of humiliation. So what I have said about finances, financial sector is very vulnerable. Now if you take, because of the financial derivatives, if you attack one big point in the European system, they are all connected together. The financial system is connected together because of the financial derivative. So it affects everybody. If you attack one system in the financial system, one point, especially it affects what we call pension funds and things like that. So I think Mr. Putin has decided to challenge the financial sector in Europe, okay? Because it's much easier to fight with the Europeans on the financial sector than going for a war. Because if you take the European leaders, they said we are going to have a war in about another 4 years, and they have said you have to sacrifice our children. We have to fight against the Russians. Because some of these European leaders, not the people, they hate the Russian leader. So they want to fight it. Now, Mr. Putin has decided to fight on the financial front, not using weapons. I think that's a wise decision, because Mr. Putin is considered to be on the only adult in the European theatre. The other leaders have 10%, 15% approval rating. Now, if Mr. Putin attacks the financial sector in Europe, they can't handle it. It's much easier to than fight in the what do you call this military system. So, and in America, we are going to have severe problem with this Epstein files. So some of the things are coming out, and they have used underage girls from Turkey and other countries also, from certain reports. So it's very clear that if you take the Epstein files in America, the Israelis are involved in, and Turkey, at least Mr. Erdogan, president of Turkey or president of Turkey, he worked with Israel and America. So and one of the opposition members in Turkey, has brought this use of underage girls in Turkey in the Epstein saga. So there are a lot of countries who are with the Americans and Israel. The women, underage girls, that record is more extensive. So I talked a little about the financial sector and Europe. I always said the financial sector can be whacked. Only reason financial sector work like this because of the American domination in the using the dollar as a weapon. But because the Chinese have challenged that, they can't print a lot of money. If they print a lot of money, the American dollar will be deteriorated faster, right? Because now we see that the commodity prices, the gold price and the silver price are increasing, and even food and things like that, even timber, all these things will be increased. So the commodities will be liberated from the financial sector. So I mentioned a little bit about Canada, and I mentioned about Victor. Peter A. Victor. Okay? The other thing is Cantillon effect. Okay, so that is about when you print money, or when you can direct your money towards certain industries. So the central banks and the governments can cheat on people. Okay? So we spoke a lot about the financial sector, and what I said about, I developed these concepts very recently on the financial sector, last 6 months or something like that, going back to steady state economics, and I use the word predator economics, and most people don't use that word predator, they use parasite. Okay, so I am just borrowing something from biology. It's not the correct term to use, but I am using in the biological sense. So I think Putin will whack the European financial sector. It is vulnerable. It's not only that, even the American financial sector is vulnerable. Only reason they did was they used weapons, and they used force to impose the financial sector. And when it comes to Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka should think about restructuring their loans and going into the BRICS banking system.